Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Friends, my name's Mac, and welcome to episode 3 of McMaster University's Learn It, Build It, Create It program. Last week, we explored thrust, gravity, and buoyancy while making our very own battleships. However, this week, we have something new planned. Some may even consider this episode elementary. That's correct, friends. This week is inspired by Sherlock Holmes. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, yeah, detective stuff, that's all fun and games, Mac. However, Sherlock Holmes, that made up literary detective, actually inspired real life crime scene investigation, CSI, techniques, and tactics. Research confirms from the University of Manchester that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's famous literary detective actually contributed to modern scientific crime scene investigation. And today, you will be making your very own detective toolkits inspired by that very famous Sherlock Holmes. However, before we even consider designing and making our detective toolkits, we must exercise our minds and our bodies so we can think creatively and critically, just like that one super sleuth Sherlock Holmes. Follow me. Now, Sherlock Holmes was an excellent sneak. He was able to hide in plain sight using cunning, swift movement, and in some cases, disguises. He demonstrated this particularly well in the 1891 story A Scandal in Bohemia. This exercise is designed to develop our sneaking skills. This is the Sherlock Holmes training obstacle course. You may be thinking to yourself, okay, Mac, you just put some newspapers down on the ground. Well, think about it this way. When we step on newspapers, they make quite a bit of noise. This obstacle course, this maze, is designed to help us avoid making noise while we're walking about, just like Sherlock Holmes. So, to begin, come to the edge of your maze or obstacle course and try and walk through without stepping on the newspapers and making noise. Let's begin. Let's see if I can do it going back. Well done. This exercise, this obstacle course or maze, also works well if you're using a wheelchair. This activity can be modified any way you want to. I made a very basic obstacle course, nothing fancy. But you can make the lanes wider, you can add more obstacles, you can add different obstacles. You can see here that I added a folded plate, a paper plate, to one of the newspapers to make the obstacle higher, which forces me to move around differently or raise my leg higher. Feel free to challenge yourself. Let us know how you designed your Sherlock Holmes obstacle course. Well, I don't know about all of you, but I am feeling sufficiently limber for our next activity. Now, when we think of crime scene investigations, we often think of people collecting fingerprints. Fingerprints are a great way of figuring out who might have been at a crime scene. Believe it or not, Sherlock Holmes was one of the first people, albeit a fictional person, to mention and use fingerprints at crime scenes, most notably in the 1890 story The Sign of Four, where he mentioned the use of fingerprints when looking at a crime scene. Now, you may think that you need some really expensive and fancy gadgetry to collect fingerprints. Alas, I will be teaching you how to make your very own fingerprint powder and brush. However, be warned, This activity can get a little bit messy, so make sure there's an adult supervising you and make sure that adult is okay with you making a little bit of a mess. Let's begin. For our homemade fingerprint powder, all we need is a pencil sharpener, a bowl, and a pencil. What you're going to do is you're going to take your pencil and sharpen it. You're going to sharpen it in the sharpener and turn the sharpener over so all the pencil lead shavings fall into the bowl. And what you'll see in the bowl is a very fine powder. We commonly call this pencil lead, but this is called graphite. This graphite will be our homemade fingerprint powder. Make sure you sharpen your pencil enough so you have a good amount of powder to use. So, as you can see, I've been at this for a while, had to sharpen a couple pencils. However, I have a good amount of homemade fingerprint powder in my bowl. Now, for our brush, you can use a small paintbrush. This is just my watercolor paintbrush. However, if you don't have a small paintbrush, you can also use a Q-tip. This will work just as well. Now, I've talked a big game. However, does this actually work? I will show you. Here we have a glass. Now, if you're going to use a glass, make sure you ask an adult permission beforehand. You don't want to dirty anything without permission. So, I am going to put a fingerprint right on this glass here. Very difficult to see. However, I'm going to take my brush. I'm going to dip it into my powder. Get the powder all over the bristles. I'm going to gently dab and dust the area where I placed my fingerprint. You'll notice I'm being very generous with my application of the powder. This will just help you see the fingerprints a lot easier. Now, to remove a fingerprint from the glass with the powder on it, simply take a piece of Scotch tape and apply it over the area that you just dusted. Make sure it sticks onto the glass nice and tight. Then grab the edge of the tape and remove the glass. Ta-da! Put this over here, and as you can see, I was successful in picking up a few prints from the glass. There's one right there, one right here, one right there, one right there. And you have successfully created your very own fingerprint powder and brush and successfully removed fingerprints from a piece of evidence. Well done. Thank you very much for joining us. Haha! I got you. The episode's not over. We have part 2 coming up right now. You just finished your fingerprint powder and brush. However, we will now be creating our very own invisible ink. Now you're thinking to yourself, Mac, when did Holmes use invisible ink? Well, in 1892, during the adventure of the Dancing Men, Holmes was able to break through a secret language. And using invisible ink is a lot like using a hidden or secret language. And you can make this language with nothing but the things you have at home. Let's see. All you need to make your invisible ink is a tray full of water. All I'm using is a pie plate, a hard surface to write on. I just have a piece of wood, 2 pieces of paper, and a pencil. Good thing I've got a lot of them sharpened. Step 1. What you're going to do is take 1 piece of paper and you're going to dip it in to your tray of water. Dip it all the way in, take it out, and put it on the hard writing surface. I'm going to dry my hands here as well. After that, you're going to take your dry piece of paper and place it over your wet piece of paper, just like this. Now, you will write your secret message, just like this. Now that you've finished writing your message on the dry piece of paper, take it off. What you're left with is your wet piece of paper with the impression of your message on it. You'll want to take this wet piece of paper off of your writing surface and leave it to dry. When your message has completely dried, you will see that nothing is written on it. However, let's see what happens when we dip our message back in the water. Elementary, my dear Watson. Elementary. And you have just created your very own invisible ink. Well done. Well, there you have it. You have created your very own invisible ink, homemade fingerprint powder, and a homemade fingerprint brush. You have created your very own detective toolkit. Congratulations and well done. And of course, thank you so much for joining us today. Please reach out to us. Let us know about the different tools and techniques you use to create your personal detective toolkit. And of course, before I leave you fine people, the answer to the last episode's joke. The joke was as follows. What action movie does spaghetti make? Mission Impossible. Beat that one. And of course, the joke to be answered next episode. What does the mermaid wash her fins with? Find out next time on McMaster University's Learn It, Build It, Create It. Bye-bye!